So our focus today is on source water protection, and which is planning for and implementing strategies to ensure safe drinking water for the people of Iowa, from private wells on farms and in rural areas to our largest cities. And while source water protection isn't always the main priority of a lot of our watershed projects and water quality efforts, it's a really important component and can be a very important co-benefit of those projects. So the presentations today will focus on source water protection first in Lake Rathbun and their farmer-focused outreach efforts there. Then we'll hear from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources about new people and approaches to source water protection there with the DNR. Then we'll move on to partnerships and partnership building in source water protection with the city of Cedar Rapids in the Cedar River watershed. And then finally wrap it up with some source water protection opportunities with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So with that full lineup of speakers, we don't have a lot of time to spend on the private well component, but I did want to highlight a project that's going on at Iowa State. I'm involved with that along with several colleagues. And the focus of that is a survey out to several clusters of counties throughout the state with the focus to better understand habits around well water use for private use, for livestock and other uses, the testing habits, how often folks are testing their private well water to ensure its safety, and some other information gathered through those surveys so that we can at this time now put together an extension program. So I want to add an Iowa Learning Farms webinar that was hosted in February or earlier this year that highlights that project. So if you have some time, I encourage all of you to take a look at that and see an update about that particular project and where we hope to see that go into the future. But now we'll get into our speakers and the lineup of great topics that we have this morning. So our format will be about 20-minute presentations with about 10 minutes for questions and discussion after each speaker. So as you have questions, please add those to the chat box and I'll keep an eye on those and make sure that we get those covered during that question and answer time. So our first speakers are Marty Braster, who is the Support Services Officer with the Rathbun Regional Water Association. And one of his responsibilities is to coordinate the utility's source water protection activities. He's been with the association for close to 20 years. And prior to joining the association, he worked with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in field offices and for the Resource Conservation and Development Program. Marty will be joined by Velvet Buckingham, who is an environmental specialist with IAWA. And one of her main responsibilities is working with farmers and landowners to coordinate installation of best management practices in the watershed. And she has worked with IAWA since 2008 and has been the project coordinator with the Rathbun Lake watershed since 2004. She also operates her own cow-calf herd and is active on her family's farm. And then Brian DeMoss is the environmental specialist with Lucas County Soil and Water Conservation District, and he's been a coordinator since 2011. He cooperates with landowners to install best management practices in the watershed as well, and has been the lead watershed project coordinator for the Fox River Watershed Project from 2007 to 2011, and has work experience with some local farming operations, row crop and cow-calf herds and cattle feedlots as well. So wealth of experience with this group, and they will kick us off here with a focus on farmer-focused outreach and source water protection in the Lake Rathbun watershed. So I'll turn it over to you, Marty. I think you might be muted.
Yeah, Marty, we're having trouble hearing you.
Marty, you don't look muted. You might try to turn up the volume on your computer. Sometimes that's the culprit. You know, Marty, you could also call in via the number that Caitlin put in the calendar appointment. And, you know, Caitlin, should we go to a different presenter while Marty's calling in?
Are Brian and Velvet both there in the room, or can we? Oh, they are. Okay. Do we want to start with Steve Hopkins while we get the
Yeah.
audio? Okay.
Let's jump to that.
All right.
Steve,
we'll
are you ready to roll?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Steve. All right. Thanks for being flexible, Steve. And Steve is with the Non-Point Source group, Non-Point Source Coordinator and Interim Source Water Coordinator with Iowa Department of Natural Resources Watershed Improvement Section. So he administers the EPA Section 319 funds and watershed projects in Iowa and oversees the Non-Point Source Management Plan. Prior to becoming the Non-Point Source Coordinator in 2007, he supervised the DNR Water Supply Operations Section and worked in DNR septic system and private well programs. So Steve brings a wealth of knowledge in different parts of the Department of Natural Resources. So we're excited to hear from him today and the great work going on in source water protection with the DNR. So thanks, Steve, for quickly shifting and being ready to go.
No problem. Can you see the presentation on the screen?
Yes.
It's a thumbs up. Thank you, Sean. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this today. It should be, I'm looking forward to not only talking about our new effort, but also to hear from the other folks that are here, because I'm pretty sure I know everyone on this panel very well. So it should be a lot of fun. We have some new initiatives that I want to talk about with source water. In the past, I have worked for 14 years as the Non-Point Source Coordinator for Iowa DNR. And just several months ago, as of January 1st, I started working as the Interim Source Water Coordinator. So I'm going to just go ahead and roll into how that came about. To give a very brief history of source water protection, not only in the US and in the state of Iowa, it dates back to amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1996, which changed the name to Source Water Protection and led to the development of source water protection plans. That's something that we at Iowa DNR have been involved with for a number of years. And because there are so many groundwater-based drinking water systems, public water supplies in the state of Iowa, traditionally, a lot of our source water protection efforts have been based on groundwater-based water sources. And I should mention too that Matt Dvorak is, I believe, in the meeting today. He works in our source water program. So I hope that if I misspeak, Matt will be quick to correct any mistakes I might be making in the presentation. To give you some of the public water supply numbers in the state of Iowa, we have 1,835 public water supplies in the state. In our source water protection efforts, we've been working on developing a number of phase 1 assessments, and that's what Matt has been working on for a while. And those assessments hopefully lead to what we call phase 2 source water assessment plans. And then those plans help identify priority areas for implementing conservation practices that would help improve drinking water quality in those source water areas. I'm going to move from there to some maps, and I know that everyone loves maps. And I think it's helpful to look at this particular map of the landform regions of Iowa, simply because they help define the type of drinking water sources that we have in the state. In northern Iowa, almost all of the drinking water sources are groundwater based, with the exception of Iowa Great Lakes up in the northwest corner. And then in the southern Iowa Drift Plain, in the northern portion of the southern Iowa Drift Plain, we still have a lot of groundwater based sources. But then in the hillier parts in the southern tier of counties, we have a number of surface water lakes that serve as drinking water sources. And I know that the Rathman Lake team is on, and they're a very prominent and important public drinking water supply based in that southern Iowa Drift Plain landform area. And also in that area, we have a number of river systems. City of Des Moines, Cedar Rapids draw upon river systems. So in any case, I wanted to draw your attention to this map so we can talk about how the landform regions define the type of source water protection we work on. This shows you how in our assessment work, we've mapped a number of the groundwater areas in the state of Iowa, and just you can see the locations of them fit very closely with the landform regions in the state based in northern Iowa and do not include the southern Iowa areas, mostly because that tends to be more of the surface water lakes. And the phase 1 assessments that I mentioned just only briefly, again, traditionally have focused on doing assessments of public wells, so largely groundwater-based work in the past. Regarding surface waters, I added this particular map simply because the NWQI, National Water Quality Initiative through NRCS, opened up a new source water protection program a couple of years ago. We made recommendations to include several surface waters to be eligible for NWQI source water funding. And you can see on the map, they include 4 subwatersheds of the Rathman Lake watershed in the lower part of Iowa, Cedar Lake in Winterset, and then the Iowa Great Lakes up in northwest Iowa. But again, just kind of thinking about the landforms in the state, we have mostly groundwater in the north, and we have surface waters in the south, and kind of a combination in between. Now, in addition, in my non-point source coordinator world, where in the past we have been implementing 319 funded watershed projects, the purpose of those watershed projects, which you can see on the map here, has been exclusively to help restore impaired lakes and streams. And so all of the work has been based on helping to improve surface waters, those lakes and streams. So the 319 funding that we've had is just one funding source around the state. In addition, I'm sure everyone's aware that the HUD grant that Iowa received enabled the Iowa watershed approach to develop, and you can see the different IAWA areas within the state that have been implementing practices specifically primarily for reducing flooding, but in addition also to improve water quality. And then one more map of the state, I thought it would be important to talk, when looking at all the different funding sources that we could count up, which includes DNR funding, IDALS funding, the watershed approach, WMAs, we have a map that looks like this with priority areas. And again, most of that work has been to focus on improving water quality, surface water quality around the state. So we've had a lot of different funding sources that have strings attached to do certain things to improve surface water quality. But something that changed is when there was a new NRCS funding priority that was based on source water implementation. And you're probably aware that with the 2018 Farm Bill, 10% of NRCS funds were to be devoted to source water implementation. And because in the state of Iowa, we have source water that's both groundwater and surface water based, that led us to ask the question, well, why not combine the watershed with the surface water, source water efforts? So we became very involved with the NRCS Source Water Subcommittee, which helped identify source water priority areas in the state of Iowa that provided eligibility for source water implementation through NRCS. And I know John Hubert and Scott Cagle are here, and they probably will be discussing that, but that has provided a new large prioritization of source water in the state of Iowa, which leads to the next part of what I wanted to mention. And because of that, we at DNR have decided to reorient the work that we've done. We still have statewide staff in our source water protection program. For my duties, source water protection was added to my non-point source coordinator role. So I'm currently serving as the interim source water coordinator. And I'm joined by Matt Dvorak, who's on the meeting today, who's been involved with the program to develop phase 1 assessments, as well as Chad Fields, a longtime DNR staffer who's a specialist in groundwater efforts. So between Matt and Chad, they help put together watershed assessments. In addition, the phase 2 source water plans, we end up contracting a lot of that work to the Iowa Rural Water Association with Aaron Schrader, who works with entities, as well as with Tetra Tech, who is developing surface water plans. And I list several of them here. Osceola, Montezuma, and Lamoni are a few that are being developed for surface waters. And our source water planning hasn't really changed. It still involves developing a 7-step source water plan. It still involves developing a source water protection team. So our statewide efforts help to develop that effort to help set up source water plans. But in addition, in our non-point source work, we had developed a basin coordinator map where we, in 2020, created a 3rd basin coordinator. So we now have 3 basin coordinator positions. Mary Beth Stevenson, who is on the call, had been our Eastern Iowa Basin Coordinator to help develop watershed projects. And Mary Beth, because you were sick, we had to replace you with 2 people. So we now actually have 3 basin coordinators. And in addition to helping local groups develop funding for watershed projects, we've gotten permission from EPA to also consider source water plans in addition to our 9-element watershed plans that have been the basis of our 319 watershed projects. So we're expecting that Steve Conradi and Kyle Ament and Josh Balk, our basin coordinators, will be able to become more involved with helping with source water planning in the future. And then the most recent, kind of the newest thing, and the thing I wanted to point out the most, is that we have just created 3 new permanent positions within DNR. And these are watershed/source water coordinator positions, geographically based. And they include Ethan Teese, who has been the Blackhawk Lake coordinator based in Sac City. Ethan will be working on also, in addition to helping improve water quality in the Blackhawk Lake watershed, he will also be involved with helping develop source water implementation work within a multi-county region around Sac City. And over in the Dry Run Creek watershed, Josh Bulk is our Dry Run Creek watershed coordinator while also serving as an interim basin coordinator. So he's wearing 2 hats right now. And in addition to working on watershed work in Dry Run Creek, Josh will also be tasked with beginning to implement source water protection work within those counties around Waterloo. And we just hired a new coordinator, Megan Toole-Giorgenti, in the Trout Run watershed up in Decorah. Megan started last Friday, so she's brand new. She will be helping to begin a new watershed project in the Trout Run watershed near Decorah, as well as implementing source water work in Winnebago County and the surrounding counties. So what's new is that we're lumping these 2 efforts together, watershed work as well as source water work. These are the people who will be working with farmers and landowners in those areas, simply because the type of practices and the type of work tends to be very similar. We're trying to implement conservation in very targeted areas to do both things, both to improve water quality and the source water. And because I originally thought my presentation was titled New Faces, I decided I needed to have some faces to show. So here is Josh Bulk, our Dry Run Creek watershed coordinator, who is located in Waterloo. And Josh let me know that this is an older photograph. This is a pre-COVID photo, so his hair is a little bit longer now than it was when this photo was taken. It's not the case for me, I should say. In the Blackhawk Lake watershed, this is Ethan Teese, who is our permanent watershed coordinator there, and who also will be implementing source water protection work in Sac County and the surrounding counties. And then Megan Toole-Giorgetti, who is actually supervised under DNR Fisheries. And of course, any photos of a fisheries person involves them holding a fish. And so here is Megan with her fish. And she'll be working in the Trout Run watershed and then implementing source water protection work up in the Wenatchee County and surrounding areas. So this map, and I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but what it's trying to illustrate is that for groundwater source water protection, those groundwater source water areas tend to be much smaller than our watershed areas where we're implementing work. And so in the middle of this particular map, you can see a couple of circles those are the red circles of the 2-year capture zones. Those are the high priority groundwater areas that a watershed coordinator, a source water coordinator would be working to improve in addition to the areas surrounding it. For watershed work, it's larger. It's based on a HUC 12 watershed area. So I'm just giving an example of how the prioritization is important for both. It's just in a smaller geographic area for groundwater source water protection areas. So again, I'm showing you that map again, which is our new 3 watershed source water coordinator locations in the state. And in addition to them working with farmers and landowners in their area, we're intending to provide statewide coverage for source water protection as best as we can. And I should also mention that through our existing 319 watershed projects, we provide salaries for several watershed coordinators who are also implementing source water protection efforts. And they include the Rathbun Lake Watershed Project. And I know that Brian DeMoss and Velvet Buckingham are going to be involved in this call. They've been implementing, in essence, source water protection for a number of years through the Rathbun Lake Watershed Project. And then up in the Great Lakes, we provide funding for John Wills's work with the Iowa Great Lakes Watershed Project. And that includes a source water protection plan for Spirit Lake. So in essence, we have been implementing some source water work through some of those 319 projects in the past, but we're really excited to have permanent DNR watershed source water coordinators on staff finally. And hopefully they'll be implementing conservation practices. And this is one of my favorite cover crop photos. This is Jason Owl, DNR wildlife biologist in northern Iowa, who on one of our DNR wildlife management areas, we were implementing cover crops to try to make sure that we were walking the talk on DNR managed land. And Jason is showing off the radishes, turnips, excuse me, and that had been grown in that land. And we're hoping to see more cover crops statewide through our watershed work and our source water protection work. And we still maintain a DNR source water webpage with a lot of information that is available. We have a source water guidebook, source water workbook, a source water mapper and tracker. So this is our source water webpage, and I'd be happy to open it up to questions. And of course, since Matt is on, hopefully he can, as I mentioned before, correct any things that I've misstated. But those are the new things in our program where we're trying to fully integrate better watershed and source water coordination work at Iowa DNR.
Thanks, Steve. That was a great overview. Exciting to see the merging of several of those projects and the great resource people that you have there with the DNR. So I'd welcome anybody to unmute and ask questions of Steve, or put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. So whichever works best for you.
Join audio. Can you click on that? Over on the far left.
This is Marty in Rathbun. Can I ask if you can hear us?
Yes, we can.
Well, great presentation, Steve. Thanks for mentioning us.
Thank you, Marty. It's good to hear your voice finally.
Yeah, you don't really mean that.
I do.
Steve, while we wait for other questions, I'll ask, within those 3 regions where you have the relatively new or reassigned coordinators, are there particular communities they're focused on right now in terms of implementing source water plans? Or are they seeking collaborations? How are they operating right now?
There are phase 2 source water plans that are completed. So part of what they would be doing would be to help implement the source water plans that have already been completed within their area. We expect that they may be helping to develop new plans over time. This is so new, we just haven't gotten to that point yet. So at this point, their job is to help implement existing plans.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, Steve. And I know we can open it up for additional conversation after the next presentation. So if you think of something for Steve, please put it in the chat. But now we'll go back and work with our folks from Rathbun Lake, and we'll start with Marty. Great that your audio is now working.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks for covering again, Steve. I'll go ahead and see if I can share our screen. And can everybody see our screen?
Yes,
we
looks
can.
great.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and get started. And thank you for the opportunity to share our experience today. Little bit of we wanted to provide a little bit of context, but and I'll do that. And Velvet and Brian, of course, are here with me. And after a little context, I'll turn it over to them to share what you really would like to hear about is how well they work with landowners in the watershed. Of course, they can jump in anytime during the presentation. A caveat that we always like to share when we give presentations about our work is that our world is Rathbun Lake and Rathbun Lake watershed, and we don't pretend that the things that we do here will necessarily work someplace else. So if it comes across that way, please don't take it that way. We're just sharing what we believe is working for us. And then again, we'd be glad to answer questions at the end as well. Why protect Rathbun Lake? A water supply for Rathbun Regional Water Association, and I say, as Steve mentioned, we've been doing source water protection at Rathbun Lake since 2004. So, and I have to compliment Steve and his colleagues on combining the state's source water protection and watershed protection programs. It's beneficial for organizations like ours and efforts like ours that there's close coordination between those two programs. Of course, Rathbun Lake is also a source of recreation for 1 million visitors each year. We're home to the Honey Creek Resort that you see in the photo in the lower right. Fish and wildlife habitat, flood damage reduction, water for Iowa's DNR's Rathbun Lake Rathbun Fish Hatchery, and storage to supplement navigational flows. These are actually the if you call them the designated or authorized uses of Rathbun Lake. Rathbun is a Corps of Engineers reservoir, and these are the uses that the lake is managed or was created for and is managed for by the Corps of Engineers. A little bit about Rathbun Regional Water, since we are talking about source water protection. Rathbun Regional Water is the largest rural water system in Iowa and one of the largest in the United States, one of the 3 largest actually. We have over 90,000 customers in 57 communities and 18 counties, both in Iowa and Missouri. We have 2 water plants that use conventional surface water treatment. You see the plants in the photograph there with the lake in the background. We currently have about 7,000 miles of water mains, 36 water towers, and 39 pump stations across our service territory. And Rathbun Lake is the raw water source for our 2 water treatment plants. And I'll show you, here's a service territory map. We cover a good part of south central and southeastern Iowa. Everything that's in the cream and yellow color, both in Iowa and in Missouri, is served from our 2 water plants at Rathbun Lake. In other words, Rathbun Lake is a source of water for those areas. Over as you get toward the Mississippi, here we purchase water from Mount Pleasant, Burlington, Fort Madison, and Keokuk, and then we turn around and wheel that water out to the rural areas and smaller communities in those areas. Just a little bit, again, context, Rathbun Lake and the watershed, 354,000 acre watershed. Land use, this is updated land use data thanks to efforts by Brian and Velvet. This is field assessed, if you will. Land use now at 47% cropland, 31% grassland, and 16% woodland. Of note there for us is that probably since the last time we did a really good, since the TMDL, I would say we've had almost a 10% increase in cropland in the watershed. And a lot of that not necessarily going more toward corn, soybeans, and not as much toward what we would call extended rotation. About 15,000 residents, a little over 800 farms, and 10 small communities in the watershed. The lake itself is at normal pool is 11,000 acres, and surrounding it are 21,000 acres of public land owned and managed by the Corps of Engineers and the Iowa DNR. Then, as I mentioned before, the lake reservoir was developed and is managed by the Corps of Engineers, who are and have been, for as long as I've been at Rathbun, a great partner when it comes to source water protection. And there's a map of the lake. We'll have the Sheridan River on the northern half of the lake feeding the lake, and then the South Fork of the Sheridan River feeding from the southern half of the watershed. All are parts of 6 counties, with Lucas County and Wayne County having the bulk of the watershed, and of course the lake itself sitting in Appanoose County. A little bit about our approach to protecting Rathbun Lake, and we would maintain that this is what we would like to, what we share with others when we have a chance to talk about our source water protection efforts. A little bit of perhaps what others should think about when they're doing their work. Determine water quality impairment of primary concern. To underscore here, we firmly believe in a strong and continuous water quality monitoring program. We weren't always that way. Early on, actually, we felt that spending money on water quality monitoring was spending money that we could otherwise use to cost share practices. However, now if we go a little bit out monitoring water quality, we get into a panic. It's become that important to us. Of course, in the end, our efforts will be judged by the quality of the water in the lake, and so if we're not monitoring it, how will we ever gauge our success? But also, it's used to it's professionally done. We work between we've had the DNR be involved, the hygienic lab involved, Iowa State's been involved. Here at the water utility, it's a great role for water utilities to play in the water quality monitoring part of projects. And we've now been monitoring continuously since the late 1990s in the lake and in the watershed. Corps of Engineers are involved. I needed to add that. And that's the information that's used in 305B assessments, water quality assessments. It's the information that's used to determine whether the lake and water bodies in the watershed are impaired. And it's just so very important to first identify what's your water quality impairment of primary concern. And I say that because we have talked to any number of projects that that haven't even taken this very first step of monitoring water quality and understanding what is that water quality impairment of primary concern they're going to focus on. And then the second bullet is, once you know what your water quality impairment of primary concern is, well, I'm sorry, I skipped over. In Rathbun Lake, our water quality impairment of primary concern is algal and non-algal turbidity, phosphorus, and sediment, if you will. Then once you have determined that, you need to identify where's your principal source of impairment coming from. If you're going to do something about it, our experience is that you can, and that's the targeting aspect of any project, but in our experience, we've identified row crop production, and more specifically sheet and rill erosion off row crop production. And then we've been able to identify through modeling what we term priority land. And priority land for us is the 20% of the watershed that contributes 80% of the sediment and phosphorus to Rathbun Lake. I think I have a map here. So this is a priority land map for us, and we take priority land and we subdivide it into a low priority, medium priority, and high priority, all based on estimated delivery of sediment and phosphorus to Rathbun Lake. And again, there's about, well, our current assessment would have about 60,000 acres of the 354,000 acres classified as priority land. And that's the land that we work on. All of our efforts, technical assistance and financial assistance, are directed toward reducing sediment and phosphorus load coming off that land. Of course, once you identify your primary water quality impairment of primary concern, and then you identify where it's coming from, you actually have to come up with or determine what's the cost-effective way to address the source of impairment. And for us, when we look at practices over the time that we've been doing this, we try to evaluate them based on the average annual cost of reducing a ton of sediment or a pound of phosphorus going into Rathbun Lake, which are the practices that are giving us the biggest bang for the buck. And of course, you can't overlook the landowner adoption. So whatever we come up with in terms of practices, landowners who we work with, because we're almost always working on private land, they have to be willing and able to incorporate those practices into their farming operation, to invest in them themselves. And for us at Rathbun Lake, what we have found, and our focus is primarily on structural best management practices: terraces, water and sediment control basins, grade stabilization structures, sediment basins. That's not that we ignore, if you will, the management practices, things like cover crops or tillage practices. We certainly promote those, but in terms of focus of financial assistance, and most definitely focus of financial assistance, cost share, goes towards structural best management practices. And then those 3 points are just so important to reinforce, again, because we've seen projects that perhaps haven't given them due consideration. Is what is your impairment of primary concern? Where is it coming from? And do you know what to do about it in a cost-effective and acceptable way? Those are a base foundation in terms of our efforts. After you know that, have that foundational knowledge, then you can move toward implementation. And these next bullets would be more toward implementation. Local leadership and partnerships are important. We have a Rathbun Land and Water Alliance, members of which are the soil and water conservation districts and counties in the Rathbun Lake watershed, along with Rathbun Regional Water Association. And then we have many, many public and private partners, Steve and folks at the DNR being a principal partner. And this slide is more important because of the partners than it is for the financial support. So we direct your attention to the number of agencies and organizations that are working with our Rathbun Land and Water Alliance to provide financial technical assistance to landowners, and that the bulk of the resources go toward those two things. And we always like to point out the contribution from participating landowners in the watershed, now above $5.5 million for cost sharing practices. A couple other implementation components before we get to Brian and Velvet's insight. We are active in outreach activities. The couple that we wanted to highlight, we have a Raft and Lake Protectors Recognition Program. We've had close to 80 landowners be recognized for their efforts, going above and beyond, if you will, to protect water quality in Raft and Lake. And then annually, up until last year with the COVID impacts, we conduct farm to faucet events and bring landowners in from the watershed and have an evening of recognition and updates on the project, as well as water treatment plant tours. And then the last and certainly the most important part is the one-on-one technical assistance, and that's Velvet and Brian. We deliver on-farm one-on-one technical assistance, and we're fortunate to have individuals, Velvet and Brian, and folks in our field offices are dedicated, hardworking, qualified, and credible. And I've mentioned many times at many presentations that if you gave us a choice and told us we could have funds either for cost sharing practices or funds for that qualified, credible staff, you can keep your funds for the practices and give us the funds for the staff, and we will make it work that way. So the next, I just wanted to turn this over to Velvet and Brian. There are a couple of slides here and several bullets for them to share their thoughts and their experience, their insight from the field. So I'm just going to let you guys go with it.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay, perfect. Well, I am here along with Brian DeMoss, and we just wanted to share some things that we believe are important in helping us, as Marty mentioned, do all the great work in the watershed, really to work with landowners. The main one in my mind that I like to start with there is our experience in RCS and IDALS technicians. Brian and I joke that, you know, most of the time the landowners come in the door, they want to talk to a technician. They're not asking for a DC. They're not asking for a soil con. Most of the time they're not asking for Brian and I either, unless they're wanting some funding. But most of the time they've got a problem on their farm and they're wanting a technician to help them to figure out what they need to do to fix their problem. And we are blessed down here in our watershed that we have a lot of technicians with many years of experience. I mean, 20 and over 30 years of experience. And that knowledge is huge in the watershed because it lends well in letting those landowners get comfortable with them. Most of our technicians could tell you what each individual farmer has for his planter size, you know, everything, how they like their farms. And it really helps in that willingness for those landowners to want to work with us. Most landowners don't just own one farm in the watershed. So I look at it as if you go to a restaurant and you get a bad meal, you probably don't want to go back to that restaurant for a long time to eat. Well, it's the same thing with a landowner's farm. I mean, they care more about that farm than a lot of things. So I think it's important that we work with those landowners to get a practice out there that's going to help address their problem, but that they're happy with at the end of the day. And that is a lot of times is a learning lesson. Landowners a lot of times like things straight, north and south or east and west, because it fits best with their equipment and their rows and everything. And, you know, with Brian and I's help and those technicians' help, you know, you got to get out there on the farm and explain that that's not going to work the best unless they want to clean silt out of these things every year because, you know, it's dropping too fast. They're going to get too much row grade into them, all of those details. So, again, I think a large part, it's our technicians in our watershed and doing a great job in getting these practices out on the land that, again, always has that willingness of the landowners wanting to work with us. The next item is most of our staff live in the watershed, are involved in the watershed communities, and have been, again, for numerous years. I think that's huge in selling things. I know Brian and I joke we can't attend any of our kids' events usually without getting hit up about, hey, I saw so-and-so down the road doing something. What's he doing? And are you guys part of that? So most of the time we sell a lot of our projects outside of the office. I know the technicians say the same thing. You can't go to the feed store. You can't go to a farm sale. You're selling cattle. Usually somebody's hitting you up somewhere about the watershed, or they want you to look at their farm, or the next time you're out, can you give them a call? So again, I think that's huge in building that connection where they see you out and involved in the community, you know, buying feed, supporting local things. I think that's huge for landowners and building trust and wanting to work with you. And that comes back to that next bullet, is the farm background and experience. Most of the staff in our field offices live on farms. They farm in the watershed. If not, they're maybe just out of the watershed, but again, they've got that local experience. So a landowner comes in and a drought's affected him and he doesn't have any feed for his cattle for the year. Most of our staff understand that because they're going through the same situation. So that really helps, I think, in building that connection between the landowners and the staff.
Important roles of our contractors here. To me, they're huge to me anyway. The contractors that do all our implementing of our BMPs, we have a very good relationship. And as a new employee, always tell people that contractors are probably one of the first people you want to get to know. They want to make money too. They want to get stuff done in a timely manner. Anyway, they do a lot of our promoting of our funding and the practices we want to get on the ground. The timely implementation, I put that on there because they'll contact us, say, hey, I'm going to go to so-and-so's farm next to start working there. They help us keep ahead of them, and that's how we get a lot of our practice done in a timely manner. Working relationship and trust between landowners and staff. Trust is the big word there. It's almost, since we've been here for so long, it's almost like we know a lot of the people around the area. It's just funny how relationships work. This past weekend, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, just my wife and I. And all of a sudden I heard somebody say my wife's name, hey, there's Abby. So we're sitting there and turned around, and I put two and two together that this kid that I'm having a beer with is the son-in-law of a producer that I work with here in the Rathman watershed, who is kind of a hard-headed producer. But he's more of a cattle guy, and he's taking all his fences out and going row crop. And this young man that I was with was the one promoting that. Well, he's the one I've been wanting to get the phone number from for a while now. So now I have him on speed dial just from being in Nashville, Tennessee on the same weekend. So it's just funny how relationships come about when working in the watershed stuff. But.
And then our levels of cost share. Unfortunately, landowners do not have deep pockets that are full of money at all times of the year. We've seen that in the past with low prices and now higher prices. But anytime we can get a higher level of cost share, especially the NWQI and the Source Water Protection Program, that level of cost share just pays a little bit better. Even sometimes it ends up being better than the 75% cost share, which we're able to use through our 319 and watershed protection funds. But again, those cost share incentives are huge. It used to be when a landowner would come in and had a problem on their farm, it may be one area, and we just look at that one area. Well, now we're taking an approach and looking at their whole farm, and the technicians a lot of times will do an estimate for that whole farm, and then we'll split it up into pieces, maybe an A, B, C, and D, and then figure out the cost for each of those individual areas. In the past, with a lot of our 50% and 75% cost share, maybe they were only able to work on one area. But now, again, because of some of these higher incentive programs, we're maybe able to do more areas of their farm because that landowner's cost is lower because of this higher payment rate that these landowners are getting. So again, that just helps make our conservation go that much farther, because instead of just working on a piece by piece, maybe taking over 3 or 4 years to get done, we're able to do more conservation and help treat more of that producer's farm, which is more efficient for everyone. It's more efficient for staff as well as contractors. Once that contractor's there, he'd just as soon work on the whole farm and fix areas that they're having problems with than having to come back 3 or 4 times. So again, those are just a few things that that we think are helpful, and that's our insight. As Marty mentioned, that's just down here in Rathbun Lake. Thankfully, we don't have to cover all different parts of the state, and we just get a focus here. So as Marty mentioned, there now on the slide is a lot of our practices, but again, we're primarily looking at those structural practices because we know they're going to be there to stay for years to come.
Thanks, Velvet and Brian. And again, a few bullets here just to give an indication of areas in which we've had progress. Assisted 600 landowners, see the number of practices there, acres we've been able to address. And then for us, moving toward our goals of reducing sediment and phosphorus delivery to Rathbun Lake gives an indication of what we've been able to do there. And back to our water quality monitoring, for the last decade, we've had a stable trend in water quality, which we're glad of that, but stable at a level that is higher than what we would like to have it be at in terms of phosphorus and sediment loads. But it has been stable. And just to give you a more of a visual for, this is one of our sub watersheds, gives you a visual of applying practices for priority land. Again, this is about a 5,000 acre sub watershed. Inside of there's probably around, not probably, around, there's 1,500 acres of priority land in its different categories. And everything that's been outlined in yellow there has had practices applied to it and is no longer delivering sediment and phosphorus to Rathbun Lake at a level that would be considered priority land. And we track our practices in each one of our 61 sub watersheds in this manner. And again, well, we better wrap it up. We probably went a little long. We're glad to take any questions now or any time in the future. And we do have a website where we often direct people to for more information about our efforts.
Well, thanks, Marty and Velvet and Brian. That was a great overview of your project and a great showcase of what dedicated professionals over a long period of time can do. You know, you have accomplished a lot and are still working and focusing on source water protection there in Southern Iowa. We did have a couple of questions in the chat. I know you mentioned sediment being a big issue. How big of an issue are nitrates in Lake Rathbun? Is that a concern at all for you?
Fortunately, no, they're not. Nitrates are regularly low. When I say low, almost always below 2 parts per million, 2 milligrams per liter. And we do not, at our treatment plant, we do not do anything for nitrate removal. So what comes in goes out. But we are fortunate that no, it's not a water quality impairment of primary concern.
Thank you. Any other questions folks want to ask?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm curious if harmful algal blooms are at all an issue in Lake Rathbun and something that you guys are having to worry about. With respect
We
to
didn't hear that really well. I did. We didn't hear that question really well.
Oh,
sorry.
Mary Beth asked about harmful algal blooms and if those have been an issue for you yet, or do you foresee any issues there related to harmful algal blooms?
They have been from a recreational point of view. We have had microcystin levels high enough to have beach advisories, but in terms of raw water and most definitely in finished water, there hasn't been a concern up to this point at all. We do. Hasn't been an issue. It's always a concern. I'm sorry. Yes, so indeed, we are always concerned about it. We a main part of our treatment is granular activated carbon, and we rotate, if you will, replace and renew the carbon in half of our filters every other year. It's several $100,000 investment each year to do that, and it is our primary means of being able to keep cyanotoxins down below any level of health related. concern. But they haven't even been in our raw water. They have not been of a level that would cause us a concern. They have been, as I mentioned, in the lake from a primary contact, recreational contact point of view.
All right. Well, thank you. Really appreciate hearing from all of you, and thank you, Marty and Velvet and Brian again. So now we'll move from delivering source water or delivering drinking water to rural communities now to one of our largest cities in the state, to the city of Cedar Rapids. So with us from Cedar Rapids, we have Mike Kuntz. He serves as the Utilities Environmental Manager for the city of Cedar Rapids. And we have Mary Beth Stevenson, who serves as the Watersheds and Source Water Coordinator for the city. So I think Mike will kick things off, and then we'll hear from Mary Beth. So take it away, Mike.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And excuse me, I'm trying to share my screen. Now, do you see the presentation screen?
Yes, we
Without
do.
the notes? Okay, great. Thank you, Jamie, IAWA, and all of our partners. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about our watershed approach, and in particular, how that applies to our source water. And Steve, just to piggyback on your comment about Mary Beth, yes, Mary Beth has been a great addition. We're so fortunate to have her join us. And she is our Watersheds and Source Water Coordinator. So she's coordinating all of our efforts really in Cedar Rapids as it applies to our watershed approaches. And it's ironic because there were 3 of us leading that effort. 2 of us have retired. I'm still here, but so Mary Beth really does do the work of 2. So I'm glad to have her, and she will jump in here and help me here after I set the stage. So Cedar Rapids utilities. So we're the 2nd largest city in Iowa. As Jamie mentioned, we are the 2nd largest city in Iowa. We have a population in our main, the city of Cedar Rapids of 130,000, but through our utilities, we serve over 180,000 residents in the metro area around us. And for the utilities department in Cedar Rapids, that includes what you see on the screen, the garbage and recycling, our water production, water to serve our customers, and then our water pollution control facility to treat the water at the spent water of our community. So why is watershed work important to us? We've talked about some of these things. You may have heard some of our presentations in the past. And so we have several leading priorities. And so these priorities are leading or driving our belief that these problems are large and we're not going to gain significant traction by focusing inside our city boundaries. We have to do work in the watershed on a larger scale to really have a long-term effect on some of these problems. So today you can see the ones that you see those leading priorities on the screen. Today we're going to focus a bit more on source water. So that's what we'll do here. So to give you a little background for those of you that might not know, Steve talked about some of the groundwater sources and river sources. We're sort of a little bit unique. We're kind of a hybrid. We do have groundwater wells. However, they are in proximity to the Cedar River, and they're in the shallow alluvium that's near the Cedar River. And you can see in the diagram a depiction of our wells. The green straw structure there on the right is typical, poke a single hole, it goes down, and that's a well drawing from the aquifer directly. And we have several of those in our arsenal of wells, if you will. And then the one on the left is what's called a Ranney well. And this well is designed with a larger center column or shaft that goes down to the aquifer, and then out the bottom are radiant arms that extend out, and they're perforated tile lines, almost like a perforated tile, but larger. And the whole point of these wells is they allow a quicker withdrawal of water so we can meet demand, so we can get water quicker and more volume as we need it to meet demand. So these are the sort of the 2 types of wells. You see the statistics there on the right of how much we produce every day, and then some of the ag-related industry that relies on our water to turn products in the watershed, this corn and soybean products, into food, fiber, and other products that go around the world. So those wells, just to give you an idea, this is kind of an overhead map of how the Cedar River sort of comes through Cedar Rapids in this big S shape. This is upstream sort of into the west of 380. But you can see along the river, the dots represent the different wells that we have. We have 40 some of the straw type that I was describing along the river there in the aquifer. And then I think there's 6 now of the Ranny type wells where we're able to draw more volume. And so it's important to note that we do not have nitrate treatment per se. If nitrate in the Cedar River, as we see that come up over time, one of the ways we have to manage it is by alternating the sources, alternating the different wells, the different straws, if you will. Because we do have nitrate monitoring in place on many of them so that we can see what is happening real time from those. And so there are times during the year, usually in the spring, you know, that traditional time that we're all pretty well aware of when nitrate concentrations in rivers and runoff is highest. That April, May, June, that time frame normally is the time I'm talking about. We have to juggle between wells to try to manage that. And the magic level is 10 in source water. You can't, if you're 10, you know, you're in violation of some safe drinking water quality issues. But realistically, we're concerned when we get to 7.5. If we have 7.5 going out into our system, that's a concern, because if we would have a main break and issue a boil advisory, all of a sudden someone could potentially get, you know, a concentration above 10. So we're really looking at, you know, a level below 10 for action. So fortunately, we've not violated that. We've been up in the 6s in our distribution, you know, after we've treated the water for short periods. But this graph is meant to show that the impact from the Cedar River, we monitor directly the Cedar River, and you see days in those years where the Cedar River itself is above 10, and sometimes 12, you know, it depends. But so this is one of the graphs we sometimes show, just showing that the quantity of days can be an issue, because we do get a benefit of drawing that water through the gravel and the sand layers. There's some nitrification that occurs and denitrification, so it helps lower what's actually coming into our raw water. But the more days that are high, the less effective that is. So this is just trying to illustrate why nitrate is so important to us and why we are focusing on that issue in our source water planning. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mary Beth, and there'll be a pause here because I think she wants to share her screen. So thank you. I have to. Are you able to share, Mary Beth?
Yep, I sure will. Okay. So thanks, Mike, for framing that up. Bear with me a moment here as I get myself oriented. Okay, I think we're good, right?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, Mike, I thought, did a really great job framing up those concerns and giving you an overview of kind of why the nitrate issue is so concerning for us here in Cedar Rapids. And you know, over the years, we've really kind of adopted this watershed approach mind frame in Cedar Rapids. And you know, I think we really believe that addressing our nitrate concerns here in Cedar Rapids is not just an issue for us. It's really a watershed scale issue. And so to kind of give some context to this, you're looking here at a map of the Cedar River watershed, just kind of showing where we are situated in that watershed. So we're down towards the bottom in the southeast sort of portion. The Cedar River watershed is really big. It's just about 7,500 square miles, but given where we are located in the watershed, we're receiving runoff from an area of 6,749 square miles that is draining down towards us. So from a watershed management standpoint, this is a pretty big area. So, you know, the other thing that we really also like to call attention to is like much of Iowa, the Cedar River watershed is dominated by row crop agriculture. So we are at about 73% row crop here in the Cedar River watershed. And I think all of us here today really recognize just how significant and meaningful having this amount of agriculture is. So here in the watershed, we're not just growing row crops, we're also home to quite a few ag industries that are processing grain, creating jobs, and providing markets for farmers. So in Cedar Rapids alone, industries such as Cargill and some of the others that Mike referenced earlier, we're processing more than 100,000 bushels of soybeans and over 1 million bushels of corn every day here in Cedar Rapids. So the bottom line is that we're really all in this together, and we believe partnership is the key to success. And so we're really working on communicating that every acre matters within the watershed. We all have a role to play. So with that, just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing with source water protection. And that can really be boiled down to kind of 4 key strategies that we've adopted. So first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit more about our phase 2 source water protection plan. I wanted to talk a little bit about some work that we're doing to seek funding to support a new Cedar River source water partnership, how we're doing some water monitoring in the Middle Cedar, and the work that we're doing to improve practices on our own land within the city limits, including some city-owned farmland, about 2,100 acres. Okay, so we heard Steve give a really great overview of the source water protection program at Iowa DNR. And here in Cedar Rapids, we are working hard on our phase 2 source water protection plan. We're looking at a completion date of about July 2021. COVID has definitely kind of stalled things a little bit for us. So in our situation, developing a source water protection plan, it's a pretty complex undertaking. And I think the Rathbun folks can definitely understand that. In our system, as I mentioned before, we've got nearly 7,000 square miles that we need to be thinking about that are, in effect, contributing to some water quality concerns that we're facing. For us here in Cedar Rapids, our water quality in the aquifer isn't just influenced by the groundwater capture zone of our well fields, but it's really influenced by that entire Cedar River watershed upstream of Cedar Rapids. And so in our source water protection plan, the way that we're tackling this is by really acknowledging the importance of working at multiple scales. So the highest priority area for our source water protection plan will be the groundwater capture zone areas. And right now we're working on providing an inventory of contaminant sources and kind of looking at any threats within that groundwater capture zone area. And then kind of the next tier of work will be those HUC 12 watersheds where the groundwater capture zones are located, because those are actually really important for us as well. And then of course, just acknowledging that we need to be continuing our work in the entire Middle Cedar watershed and even the Cedar River watershed as a whole. So again, that concept of every acre matters, it really does matter to us in terms of reducing delivery of nitrate from farmland into the Cedar River. So we're pretty lucky that our source water areas are located in the Middle Cedar watershed, where a major watershed planning effort has just wrapped up for the entire HUC 8. And that watershed planning effort included ACPF modeling for each one of the 68 HUC 12 watersheds. So that means that we have conservation scenarios for the 2 HUC 12 watersheds that represent our source water area, which is really great because we know how many practices we want to be targeting in order to achieve our nitrate reduction goals. So for example, we know that through a 90% cover crop adoption rate, we could achieve 16% of our nitrogen load reduction targets. And also you can see from this pie chart here that bioreactors, wetlands, saturated buffers, nitrogen management, those are all going to be really important practices for us as well. So that kind of sums up the work that we're doing on our source water protection plan. So like I said, we hope to be wrapped up in that by this summer. Okay, so kind of shifting gears to talk about our next strategy here, the Cedar River Source Water Partnership. This is a proposal that we submitted to NRCS in November of 2020. And it's a little awkward. We have that proposal out. It's out there. It's been reviewed, I presume. I know Scott Cagle is on deck next to talk. And so we don't know yet if we've been funded. So I want to just kind of introduce this new partnership by saying, you know, even if we're not lucky enough to get funded through our CPP 2021, this is a strategy that we do hope to pursue. And we are very committed to this approach overall. And so Jim had asked me to share a little bit about what this proposal looks like and what our project would entail if we do get funded. So just to do that, we have about 5 main components of our proposal that I wanted to touch on. We've got implementation strategies that are going to be targeted to source water protection areas, a lot of outreach, a lot of technical assistance, closely tracking outcomes, and then really cultivating partnerships, the existing ones that we've developed over the years, as well as some new ones. And so we put in a request for about $9.5 million from NRCS. 6.6 of that would go towards implementation. And we're bringing another 11 partners in to the mix that would offer up $12.3 million in match. So, you know, we really wanted to keep that momentum going strong. We just wrapped up our previous RCPP, the Middle Cedar Partnership Project. That was wrapped up in 2020. And so we're hoping that we can kind of keep all of this energy moving. So, so that previous RCPP that we had was the Middle Cedar Partnership Project. And so that focused in on this region right here of the Cedar River watershed. But with this next proposal, the Cedar River Source Water Partnership would really cover the entire Cedar River watershed in Iowa, the Iowa portion. And so what we would do is actually target the implementation funds to areas that have been identified as high priority for source water protection, okay? So what you're seeing on the map are the areas that would be eligible and priority through this project. So the orange and the red areas, those are hub watersheds where our water monitoring efforts have indicated elevated levels of nitrates. And it's a little tough to see, but the light green and light blue areas would be high priority. Those are areas where phase 2 source water protection plans have been developed by communities. So, so our implementation efforts would kind of track along 3 sort of general areas. We really want to emphasize nutrient reduction practices. So the majority of our funding requests would go towards cover crops. And we spent a lot of time talking to watershed coordinators throughout the Cedar River watershed and really heard loud and clear that we do need to keep funding levels up for cover crops, that there's still a really high demand for that. So that was why we included the majority of the funds going towards that practice. Also wetlands, you know, we're really hoping to get some more wetlands on the ground. I think we all know the multiple benefits of that practice. And we've got Nature Conservancy and Lynn County Conservation Board as a partner to help support that effort, in addition to IAWA, who is continually working on getting more wetlands on the ground as well. And then community outreach is really key because we want to get the word out, if we're successful, that there would be additional resources available to communities to help incentivize landowners within their groundwater capture zones to implement their practices. And so this is another tool in the toolbox for them to support their implementation of their phase 2 source water protection plans. And Iowa DNR, you know, you've heard Steve talk about the staff that that are working on source water protection, so they would be a really great partner on this as well. And they are signed on to our RCPP. So outreach to targeted groups is a big part of the project as well. That coveted middle to late adopters group that you heard Sean talk about earlier. We were looking at a partnership with Ag Retail to really help us activate that relationship. So we would actually incentivize ag retailers in the Cedar River watershed to do recruitment outreach to their producers and their customers. And we feel like this is really going to help us gain access to that group. Cedar Rapids is really committed to this angle of our proposal, and we would be putting $50,000 per year towards this ag retail partnership. So we're really hopeful that that would be really productive for us. Women landowners, WFAN, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. We would be bringing them on as a partner. Sean McMahon helped us make a connection with the IAWA FFA group, and we have them on as a partner. And then the watershed management authorities in the Cedar River watershed would also be really great partners for us as well to help continue that community outreach work. Technical assistance, yes, this is essential, and I've heard this loud and clear from the previous two presenters, and I think everyone here knows just how important those boots on the ground are. We would be dedicating quite a bit of funding towards technical assistance. The conservation agronomist movements in Iowa, I think we could call it that. We would hire a conservation agronomist out of Lynn Co-op if we're funded. So we would be very excited about building that new relationship. The assistance to communities, again, really keeping that component strong. And setting aside some funds for contractual, for contracts with folks like Jason Jones, who's an independent agronomist and was provided the boots on the ground for our MCPP project. And he was really instrumental in bringing in producers to the project. So I'm trying to breeze through these slides here pretty quick because I want to make sure there's enough time for questions. Outcomes tracking, of course, is a really important part of the project. Iowa Soybean Association would be a partner for that, for monitoring our water quality indicators. And we also want to track social indicators, particularly those relationships with ag retail. Really want to kind of gain some understanding of ag retail and their attitudes and awareness about the issue and their interest in working with us. So we would be contracting with some entity to be determined to do that social indicator research work. In Land O'Lakes Truterra, we were very excited to have them on as a partner. And again, thank you to Sean McMahon for helping to forge that partnership. Truterra would be helping with some outreach and also would be making their Insights Engine platform available to us. And we're excited about the opportunity to track agronomic indicators related to the project. So some pretty neat stuff there. And of course the partnerships. I mean, that really is the bread and butter of what we're doing here in Cedar Rapids is the partnership approach. So we're really reliant on some of these partners who are the technical experts in the field. You know, we're not agronomic experts, although Mike, I bet you've learned quite a bit about farming. I know I have over the course of our work. Really grateful to all the partners who have come forward. You know, Iowa Ag Water Alliance obviously has been a great partner. City of Charles City is a new partner for us. They have source water concerns as well. So they were eager to team up with us on the project. IAWA is a big partner, really contributing quite a bit of match towards the project. And of course, their technical assistance is very much appreciated as well. And again, Iowa Soybean Association, you know, since the onset of our MCPP project back in 2015 has been such a key partner for us. And they've really supported us in developing the arrangement with Lynn Co-op for a conservation agronomist. So pretty excited to keep that going. So Marty touched on this really well, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it. But water monitoring, just as it is for Rathbun, is really important for our work in the city of Cedar Rapids as well. Marty hit the nail on the head. We have to know where we're at in terms of water quality to know how to gauge our progress. And for us, we're also using our water monitoring to prioritize areas where we want to target our limited resources. So Iowa Soybean Association and Co College are our two partners on that front. And we look forward to continuing that relationship and also continuing to share our data with partners The Middle Cedar Watershed Management Authority used a lot of our data in developing the watershed plan that they put together recently. So we're really happy to see that get some use outside of just the city. And last but not least, improving our own practices. You know, we really want to be good upstream neighbors and limit the pollution that we're sending downstream to that idea that every acre matters within the watershed. And we also want to make sure that we're implementing good conservation practices on our own land. You know, we're asking farmers to do this, and so we want to make sure that we're also doing the same. So on our 2,100 acres of farmland, in 2020, we seeded most of that to cover crops. We built a bioreactor this past fall, which is pretty fun. And a couple of years ago, we were able to partner with the Nature Conservancy to restore an oxbow wetland on city property. And in addition to that, we're working really hard on increasing the number of urban stormwater practices that are going on inside city limits. Again, just to make sure that we are being good upstream neighbors. So just want to close by saying, you know, remember that we all live upstream of someone else. We're all part of this watershed story, and we all have a really important role to play in protecting water quality. So with that was kind of a whirlwind. So thank you for bearing with me. And if you have any questions, I think Mike and I would be glad to answer.
All right. Thank you, Mike and Mary Beth. Do we have any questions for them? I think it's great to hear about the continuing theme of partnerships and trust within the watershed happening in your area as well. So that's been a continuing theme throughout the morning here. I do see a comment from Sean that Land O'Lakes Truterra would also contribute an additional $25,000 per year for 5 years to support the conservation agronomist position if this project is selected. So that's a great addition to your resource resources there to that project. All right, well, please add your questions in the chat if you think of one, but I think we'll move on now to Scott Cagle and learn more about opportunities to engage with the Natural Resources Conservation Service on source water protection. So Scott's the Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships with NRCS here in Iowa, and he has a responsibility to work with partners on the ground in Iowa through their many programs and grant opportunities that they have to get conservation on the ground. So we're happy to have Scott with us this morning to share opportunities with source water protection.
Thank you, Jamie. I guess everybody can hear me. All right, good. Well, I know I'm the last thing standing between all of you and lunch, so I'm going to get through this presentation as quick as I possibly can and try to answer as many questions. And I'm going to have to, basically stole this presentation from John Hubert. This is more or less a programs area. Let me see if I can get this dude up. There it is right there. Can you see the presentation? You can. All right, good deal. Okay. As far as what NRCS has on tap for the source water protection, of course, Steve Hopkins covered some of this a while ago. I'm trying to get my slides to advance. There we go. The 2018 Farm Bill requires that NRCS use at least 10% of the Farm Bill assistance towards support source water protection. Water quality has been addressed in the past through the Water Quality Initiative and the Mississippi River Basin Initiative. Some of the examples of source water protection, a lot of these things we address in the programs that we have. There's one thing that I did notice and wasn't in here, but I added it from my experience as a county agent. One area we don't look at a whole lot is homeowners and their lawn care. A lot of folks decide they're going to go out and dose the yards and with pesticides and fertilizers, and some of them think 1 pound's good. Well, 5 pounds of butter. So that is a source that we might want to think about in the future that is also contributing to some of the issues in our streams. And because every time everybody knows when it's going to rain, you go out and fertilize, right? And then that heavy rain takes it right on into the creeks. So anyway, just something else we probably want to think about in the future when we're working with people on the ground trying to put conservation not only out in the county, but also in town. Some of our farm bill programs that deal with source water protection, of course, we got the EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, which carries EQIP a little bit further. And of course, my favorite, Regional Conservation Partnership Program that I'll talk about here in a minute. And then the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. All these programs are designed to help with source water protection, or they have different parts of them that help. As far as Environmental Quality Incentives Program, well, that's the largest financial assistance program we have for working lands in Iowa. Had 30.1 million gets allocated last year, and 1,022 contracts. Ag and forest producers are eligible to apply for EQIP. Then as far as on some more on the working lands, we covered EQIP. You also have Conservation Stewardship Program. Working lands, again, this Conservation Stewardship Program helps you carry EQIP practices a little bit further. Had 17.5 million for 2020 and 395 contracts. Roughly 1.6 million acres in Iowa enrolled in these programs. Now, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and many of you have been associated with some of these with us. As of this moment, we actually have 15 current projects that are active. One will be the agreement on it for the renewal that Sean mentioned earlier. I'm waiting for it to come back from Washington. As soon as that agreement comes back and we make the corrections as they see fit, we'll get that one ready to go too. But that'll put us up to 16 current RCPP projects, whether we're lead state on it or we're participating with another lead state. We've got several of them still rolling in the state. And a little bit more about RCPP, and of course, then the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. And this is another one that we've got that helps buy some easements to keep land in ag and prevents non-ag uses. Another good program that we've got out there. Now, like we talked about earlier, the Farm Bill requires NRCS to consider and encourage water quality and quantity conservation practices that protect source water while benefiting ag producers, and that's the key. We're here to help the producers. And we also collaborate with community water systems to identify priority areas. Now, from late 2019 to this year, we have a state technical subcommittee collaboration, and of course, our former state conservation, Kurt Simon, was instrumental in getting this bunch together. And they had a lot of meetings and they came up with a lot of recommendations. And from there, and there's some of the subcommittee collaboration partners that we have, and we value our partners very dearly. If it wasn't for our partners, we wouldn't have a whole lot to do. But these folks came together and made recommendations. And out of that, within the priority areas, NRCS may offer to increase financial assistance for anywhere from 50 to 75% for key practices in groundwater and surface water protection areas. These are some of the practices that were recommended by the committee, and I'm not going to go through every one of them, but these were some of the key practices that they thought would fit the source water protection mode, and a few more of them right here. And again, is all designed to protect that source water. Now, priority areas, and I think Steve's map probably looked a little bit better than mine, but these are the 2021 priority areas that we've identified. A lot of them are Hook 12s. And then we have a funding separation as recommended by the Source Water Protection Subcommittee. Was 55% of it needs to go to groundwater source protection and 45% going to surface water source protection. And I think covered a little bit of that with Rathbun Lake presentation. So our summary of the next step was for the public rollout. Well, it's rolling. It's active and going. They're already obligating funds for source water protection. Going to repeat it again next year. And the practice and target areas will evolve, priorities change, and partner participation is key. And it's key for all we do here in NRCS. And we also welcome partner feedback. If